Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I am the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. I am here today with the legendary Thomas Frank. He co-founded and edited the great Baffler magazine. He is also the author of many books analyzing American politics and history, including What's the Matter with Kansas, The Wrecking Crew, Pity the Billionaire, Listen Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People, and most recently, The People Know, a brief history of anti-populism. Returning to the program, Thomas Frank, welcome to Current Affairs.
Nathan, what's up? Those book titles are all evergreen. Isn't that funny?
Good Lord, I know.
They're 20 years old, and you could like pick up What's the Matter with Kansas, and
well,
I actually did the other day, and I was chuckling at it. But it's like you know, it's still going.
That's why people should pick up and buy your books, because they never expire. But it is also depressing because it means that you are one of the most astute and least listened to people in the country.
I've grown used to that, Nathan. Those were when I was young. I had these ambitions that things might be otherwise. But I'm fully like I don't feel bad about that anymore. I used to feel bad about like that. Nobody cared and nobody listened, but I don't care anymore.
But you Listen Liberal even had the finger on the cover. It even pointed straight at them, so they knew it was them that had to listen. Yeah. And you couldn't have worded that more directly. And the liberals didn't listen because I just want to read. Let me read here from the last page of Listen Liberal, published in 2016, before the calamity of that year. You say, now all political parties are alliances of groups with disparate interests, but the contradictions of the Democratic Party coalition seem unusually sharp. The Democrats' posture as the party of the people, even as they dedicate themselves ever more resolutely to serving and glorifying the professional class, worse, they combine self-righteousness and class privilege in a way that Americans find stomach-turning. And every 2 years, they simply assume that being non-Republican is sufficient to rally the voters of the nation to their standard.
By the way, and I wrote that before I even knew about Donald Trump. Yeah.
And here we go. You say, this cannot go on. But then you make a prediction and you say, yet it will go on. Which I like. And it has gone on. As I say, you wrote this in 2016. That's a long time ago now. And then we just saw a catastrophe that I think is partly caused by some of the problems that you identify in this book.
Yeah, well, come on. This is the Democrats. Is that Red Bull you're drinking?
Yeah, this is sugar-free. This is a giant sugar-free Red Bull because I need my energy.
Yeah.
My brain.
Like you've got me beat on the energy front here, Nathan. But,
no.
But what can I say? I wrote that. It was a description of a life of disappointment at the hands of the Democratic Party. First Clinton, and then Bill Clinton, and then Barack Obama. And it was before I think Trump is mentioned once in that the original version of the book. I later wrote an afterword.
Yeah, let's see. Trump, page 255.
Yeah, I think I
one mention
names or something. Yeah, it's exactly one mention.
That's kind of interesting that you didn't need to mention Trump in order for the analysis to work.
So the book came out in spring of 2024. Yeah. Of 2016. So I would have only mentioned him. The Republican primaries were ongoing at the time, so I only mentioned him briefly. I had no idea that he would be the candidate.
And yeah, so let's dive into what it was that you were identifying then more precisely. As I read that paragraph kind of nicely summarizes it up. But let's go into a bit more detail about when you were pointing this finger directly into the face of the liberal and saying, listen, look. This is headed for catastrophe, and it's going to continue until you have a serious revelation. What would you describe as the revelation that was not had?
Well, this is a big question, Nathan. The the Democrats have been in, and so what people often don't realize is that this is a long process. It's not just something that just happened. It's not Kamala Harris. It's not Hillary Clinton. It's something that, I mean, they have a lot to answer for, but this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Not a very long time, since the 1970s. And steadily but surely, the Democratic Party, and they did this out in the open. It wasn't a conspiracy. They talked about it and boasted about it, gave speeches, wrote books and magazine articles about it, turned their back on what they used to be. There was even a collection, they when I was young, I almost said when I was your age, but sorry, I shouldn't tease you. But when I was young, they you would turn on the TV after each electoral disaster, like after Reagan had worked this incredible defeat, or after the one that really got me was when George Bush Sr. beat Michael Dukakis, where Dukakis had actually been in the lead in the polls, and George Bush Sr. was this awful man. And he won anyways, right? And then you'd go on TV the day after, and the pundits would always say the same thing. The Democratic Party has to abandon the New Deal. They can no longer be the party of the New Deal. They have to become, and they would have these various terms for it. One of the favorite ones was they have to become neoliberals. This was the big idea in the 70s and 80s. There are other names for it. They called themselves Atari Democrats. But the idea of it is, they had to become the party of a social cohort, of a social class that was identified with futureness. That sounds like bullshit, but am I allowed to say
it? It does. You are allowed to say that it's bullshit. It
sounds like bullshit, and nevertheless, it is true. They really did say these things in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And then, finally they got their way. Right, here comes the new Democrats, Bill Clinton and his group, and he's speaking exactly the things that they've been describing, and lo and behold, hallelujah, he wins. And this is
so it works. It's vindicated. It's true. They were right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how they take it. It's his election, and then especially his reelection, are vindication from heaven that this is the right path.
Yeah,
that this is the way to go. You identify yourself not with working people, but with the highly educated. They had these pet sort of love names for them. They called them the learning class. I love that one because it's just so obnoxious. They called them the wired workers. These pet names for the group that they saw as this is what a party of the left in a two-party system. This is what it has to dedicate itself to, is this group of people. And and they did what they did. They did it deliberately. And you look at the works of Bill Clinton as president, and he was a very consequential president. It's often forgotten nowadays. He actually did things as president. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, there were lots of things that were done.
Yeah, there were things. There were things, Nathan. I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day calling for a new Bill Clinton, and it was entirely about his folksy manner. And the way that he gave the stiff arm to Jesse Jackson, who, by the way, in retrospect, kind of looks like a hero. Jesse Jackson. This is the guy who actually got it right back in the 80s and 90s.
Jesse Jackson said, I think he's the one who said, he had that quote, Bill Clinton is what it looks like when Jim Crow goes to Yale.
Are we talking about the same guy that deregulated the banks? Are we talking about that guy? Is that the one, the same, the friend of the working man who allowed Wall Street to become what it is today? That guy? And that is what they mean. It's funny how nobody can talk about the two things at the same time, his manners and what he actually did. NAFTA, Bill Clinton, who screwed working people in this monumental way with NAFTA and PNTR China, and also the Bill Clinton who had that soft Southern accent and was so lovable and liked to go to McDonald's, whatever.
So I take it, what you see the Trump victories as is what you're saying is the culmination of this decades long process whereby the Democrats abandoned the the New Deal as the kind of the core of or exemplar of democratic aspirations, abandoned labor and became something else that is often called neoliberalism or corporate liberalism.
Yes, they did that, and this is what happened. And now we're seeing. I mean, this is where if you ask me, we're at the end of the road for this thing. You look at who they win now, and it's entirely affluent people. So I grew up in this neighborhood in Kansas City, and by the way, if you've heard any of these anecdotes before, just stop me, okay? I grew up in this neighborhood, suburban Kansas City, Johnson County, Kansas, and we were not rich people. Okay, still don't really understand how the Franks managed to wind up in this neighborhood, but we were surrounded by the ruling class of Kansas City. So the kids whose families own the place, and I mean own the place. It's that kind of city. It's a very beautiful city, but it has this very small little ruling elite. These families, they all know each other, and they lived all around us, and I knew their kids, right? And I thought when I was growing up, I mean, they were all Republicans. And I thought these are the most Republican people I'm ever going to meet in my life. And they like you take a guy like Bob Dole. They loved Bob Dole. He was that's what politics is. It's a guy like that. That neighborhood. So I sold the house and moved out, but I was there for the 2020 election, and Joe Biden won every single precinct in the neighborhood. It is astonishing to me. I sort of can't believe it. I used to tell the story of when I would vote there when I was younger and when I was just figuring out politics, and I would go to the polling place, which was at a country club. I'm serious. It was at this extremely elite country club that would never let people like me, like my family, join. And I went to the polling place, and they asked what party, and I said I'm a Democrat. And they had a big a big computer printout for Republicans. This is Mission Hills, Kansas. A big printout. And then for the Democrats, they had a single page. And it's entirely reversed now. It's entirely reversed. It's just the strangest thing. But that's who the Democrats are. That's who they have wanted to be all these years. That's what they talked about becoming, and they got their wish. And here's the thing, Nathan, is I don't know what power, what rebuke, what form of chastisement can convince them that this is a mistake. I don't know if anything, because it's such a self-flattering form of politics, to believe that you are these, that you're these wonderful people who are so enlightened and so tasteful. And what do you do when you lose? You scold the world.
Well, yes, this is just further proof that Americans are irredeemable and stupid. But
come on now.
Something I'm wondering is, as I say, your book points the finger. You identify this tendency, and you say, and I think a lot of people will be willing to listen now, or at least a lot of people understand that you're kind of right. I've seen more mainstream people who have this revelation. They go, "Oh my God, we abandoned the working class."
It's funny, yeah. But saying that, by the way, really killed my career as a pundit.
I'm sure. The MSNBC invites dried up.
Oh no, that completely stopped. And
because when you did What's the Matter with Kansas, they
loved me. They loved me. Yeah, because nobody read to the last chapter.
I know.
There's the nucleus of liberal is in What's the Matter with Kansas. There's a chapter right about Clinton, but nobody got that far.
No, but I'm wondering. On the one hand, you could say, okay, well, clearly they're making a terrible mistake by not pushing policies that are going to help ordinary people. Clearly, ordinary people understand that Democrats are not pushing policies that are going to help them. They understand that they're out of touch. But also, there are kind of structural reasons now why it's very hard for them to change. On the Kamala Harris campaign, it was interesting. She came out with this anti-price gouging policy that was kind of like a kind of good. And then
I never heard another word about it after the convention.
Well, what happened, I have read, is that her Uber executive brother-in-law gave her a phone call and said, Wall Street doesn't like this. You need to back off on it. And so they altered the policy and they said, oh, it's actually just groceries and it's just in an emergency and it doesn't mean anything. So one of the problems here is that they can't listen because now they're when you have to satisfy the donors. Like, it doesn't matter if you know that what you're doing is wrong and you're going to lose. They are now so dependent upon big money.
I don't know who Kamala Harris is. We didn't have long enough to learn about her.
That's right.
And I don't know really what she believes in. We know that she was very good on the abortion issue, real good, right? She was eloquent, persuasive, passionate. She was real good on talking about Donald Trump's, unfitness for office. She was excellent on that, I thought. On nothing else did she even, was she even so much as interested. She didn't care, didn't look into it, didn't study up, just didn't care. And I don't know, but the thing is that we know so little about her that we don't know really where her heart was.
Well, and in the 2020 campaign, which she ran in the primary, she was willing to embrace a lot of the Bernie policies and kind of famously at the start of this campaign ditched a number of them. They asked her, oh, do you still support Medicare for all? And she said, oh, no, absolutely not. Her campaign literally put out a statement saying Kamala Harris no longer supports Medicare for all.
Oh, my God.
No, Kamala Harris no longer supports a job guarantee. They did this in the first couple of weeks of her campaign.
Way to go, Kamala, right? Because what if she had made the whole election a crusade just about that? It would have been really interesting. But nobody has that kind of imagination. It's funny, all that money, and she just spammed me while we're sitting here, by the way.
Oh, asking for more money?
Yeah, they're still spamming. And all that money, all of that expertise, and they can't do anything like remotely creative. Anything that's like slightly original or unexpected. They can't pull it off.
Yeah.
All that money, and maybe the money handicaps them. Maybe it's something like that.
Yeah, you say all that money in cap, but actually those things are kind of related.
But you look at their convention. So I keep going back to the conventions because I went to both parties' conventions this year on behalf of a French newspaper. But their convention was so uninteresting. And by their standards, it was a great success. So, look, there was this moment when Biden drops out and it's like, what are we going to do? Democrats, what are we going to do? We got to have a candidate. Should we have, and there was a question very briefly. Should we have
half a day?
Should we have an open convention? Should we all the Democrats come together in Chicago, fight it out, fight over the issues and come up with somebody? And they're like, oh my God, save us. No, do not do that, right? Whatever you do, don't do that. And I wonder now in retrospect, it's like, well, and so you did the opposite of that. You chose your candidate immediately. You got together by a process that is still unknown to us, chose your candidate immediately, and then made the convention into this, this propaganda event on her behalf. By the way, a very, tightly, almost military precision sort of campaign, propaganda event. How would it have gone if you'd actually gone out there and debated ideas? What would have happened if you had actually done that? If you guys had actually gone to the convention without a candidate, and they had to stay there as long as it took to get one. I think it might have been healthy. We don't know. We'll never know.
No, I mean, we didn't have a primary either, obviously, because Joe Biden decided. Well, Joe Biden decided he was running for re-election, and then they made a great effort to shut down any potential challengers. Also seems like a mistake in retrospect, given what happened with Joe Biden.
Yep.
I want to ask.
It's the mistakes that they made are really unforgivable.
I'm trying to understand the distinction between the things that are mistakes and the things that are built into the party as it is because of the process that you describe in terms of the changes in their constituencies.
So I think this is a more, maybe I'm totally wrong about this, Nathan Robinson. But I think that their allergy to an open convention tells us something really important about these guys. And I think their desire to avoid primaries tells us something really important about these guys, that they are desperate to stop certain voices from having a say in the way that the party,
when they had an open primary, Bernie terrified them, and they all had to come together and find someone to stop Bernie.
An open convention, they might choose someone like Elizabeth Warren. Like, who the hell knows?
Yeah,
it might happen.
Risk. Yeah,
anything could happen. And this is one of the really fascinating things about the Democratic Party is that they over the years they have managed to keep a lid on it. The same bunch always wins. This is the Harris, not Harris, I don't blame her. The Clinton Obama faction always comes out on top, and has since Walter Mondale, they've always been the nominee, and they are determined to keep it that way. In some ways, it is their party, right? They own it in the same way that organized labor used to own it back in the old days. It is their party, and they're not going to give up. They're not going to surrender it. You can go and ask them for it. You can ask them very politely, Mr. Nathan Robinson. They're not going to give it to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a certain sense, then, Listen Liberal was never intended for the people. I mean, it looks like it's intended for the people who are causing the problem, but actually it's intended for those of us who need to throw those people out of power.
yeah. By means unknown. But it's like all my books. It's just a really good story. Also, it's for a general reader. At least I like to think it is. Back when we were doing the Baffler magazine, the Baffler magazine, its success was so unexpected and strange, and people had never seen anything like it. And they would interview me back then, and they'd say, who is your imagined reader? I would always give them the most ridiculous answer I could come up with. It'd be like, well, it's like that guy over there, or it's me. I just write it for myself. It's just I edit every article for me.
I know. People have asked me that about
never had it imagined.
Current affairs. I always find that a weird question. I go, well, I want everyone to read it. Every single person. My imagined reader is every person who exists and is literate.
Exactly. I don't have a target audience.
They should be reading us. Let me ask you how Joe Biden fits into the picture, because there is a certain narrative that suggests that Joe Biden, the Biden presidency, was a sharp break from the neoliberal Democratic Party that you describe. That Joe Biden obviously made a big effort to appear more pro-union. He declared himself, I'm going to be the most pro-union president. He openly in the first year kind of said he wanted to be the next FDR, et cetera, et cetera. So was the Biden presidency, I mean, do you see that as, all entirely a fraud? Is there something to that?
There is something to it. And so when we talk about Democrats in the party before now, I think now what everything that you and I are talking about is starting to dawn on me. But back before, back in the day when I wrote Listen Liberal, I would say you could count the number of Democrats who agreed with me on one hand, right? There's like 5 of them. I could probably list them for you, but Bernie is one, like Sherrod Brown was one. But I think to a certain degree, Biden actually got it and did take the initial steps that you would take if you were going to try to put the party on a different course. He did. So look what he did on antitrust. That's probably the brightest spot of his administration. He did inspiring things, and this is stuff that I myself had once called for. I used to write articles about this back in the day about the Democratic Party they need to break with the sort of Clinton legacy on antitrust, and they need to get tough on this again, because it's one tool where you don't need Congress. It's the laws were passed over 100 years ago. You just have to start enforcing them. and I'll be goddamned, he did it. And that was, I was, very excited about that. You mentioned Lena Khan earlier. I think she's exactly the kind of person that they should have, running federal agencies. That is exactly what they should have been doing. Now, that said, everything you described, these are tiny, tiny steps in the right direction. But they're massively overshadowed by the other things, by the Gaza disaster, by inflation, by Biden's the age issue. It's in some ways, I think the Biden years are a kind of tragedy. This is a guy who seemed to understand it to some degree, but that was just in the first. And then, like, who the hell knows what happened, right? Well, we still don't know. I frankly don't really get why he's whatever. I don't want to talk about his infirmity, but it's alarming.
There's something very strange to me where you're indicating there that Biden started to get some hint that maybe you should do these things that actually deliver for people. Bernie Sanders understands this intuitively and has understood it forever. And it strikes me every time I see, I like looking at comment sections are a cesspool, but they give you an interesting indication of how people respond to things. And so when you watch like Bernie Sanders on Joe Rogan or on Fox News, and you look at the comment section of the people who are the typical audience for those kind of things, you hear, and when you go out and talk to normal people and you say, what do you think of Bernie Sanders? They say, oh, well, I'm a Republican, but I always respect Bernie. He tells it to you straight. Every single time. Like the Bernie Sanders theory of how you reach people and what a social democrat should look like, and all of this stuff you're saying about like, well, you just need to be like an honest, plain-spoken New Deal Democrat who offers to help people and doesn't lie to them. Is really intuitive.
To add to your list, my dad was was a Republican. He died a couple of years ago, but he remembered Roosevelt and Truman and the great crusade, World War II, and Roosevelt, the great leader. And he admired those guys. And when he heard Bernie Sanders, there was something that he really liked about Sanders. Now, he disagreed with him politically, but I suspect it was his accent, which is this, it comes out of you don't hear that accent anymore. That is like Brooklyn in the 1940s, that accent.
Yeah.
And that my dad found something very reassuring about Sanders, which is, which you wouldn't expect because Sanders is regarded as such a radical, But in some ways, he is this reassuring figure from long ago. He's selling politics from the 1940s in a 1940s accent. Yeah, I really like that guy.
This is what Harvey Kay says. He says, we need to. He says, we on the left, and he actually faulted Bernie for pivoting to talking about Scandinavia. He said, don't talk about Scandinavia. He said, we have this all-American tradition of social democracy and populism, of course, which is one of your specialties. Go back to the 1930s and 40s in our country. Go back to, we have Woody Guthrie. We have this like patriotic social democracy kind of thing.
And it had intellectuals too. And it was a nobody thinks of the 30s as a happy time, but there was amazing revolutionary work getting done then, both politically and culturally and intellectually. I mean, I think of, just because of what my media diet consists of, I think of Orson Welles, Donald Trump's favorite movie, Citizen Kane. Do you ever hear my Orson Welles theory of Donald Trump?
No, what's this?
So once, a long time ago, Trump was giving an interview. They asked him his favorite movie, and he said Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane was really about accumulation. And at the end of the accumulation, you see what happens, and it's not necessarily all positive. Maybe wealth isn't everything, because he had the wealth, but he didn't have the happiness.
And everybody just assumes that means nothing because he's always like, what is the best movie?
What is the thing I've heard of?
I like. That's the one I like. Whatever's the number one, the top movie of all time. And critics always say Citizen Kane. And so, of course, he says that too. But go and watch Citizen Kane sometime on a big screen TV. And the resemblances between Kane and Trump are uncanny. uncanny.
The table getting larger and larger and larger, with he and his wife getting further and further apart as he got wealthier and wealthier. Perhaps I can understand that.
So this whole thing, like when Kane is running for office, he's running for governor of New York, and they have his name in huge letters behind him. You know?
Might as well say Trump.
And yes, Trump copied that at his convention. When he comes out on stage, it's exactly the same. Trump lives in a big mansion in Florida. Okay. And then there's this, lock her up. I had never heard that before in American politics, threatening to throw, but it rang a bell, right? I had never heard of a candidate threatening to throw their rival in prison. But it rang a bell. And I'm like, where does that come from? It's in Citizen Kane.
Amazing.
When Kane is running for office, he threatens to throw the rival candidate in Sing Sing. Do you remember this?
Dennis! I'm going to send you to Sing Sing! Sing Sing, Dennis!
And it causes the rival candidate to go crazy and drum up a scandal and defeat him. And then the last one. So when Kane loses, right? So he has a scandal, a sex scandal, and he loses. And Kane owns newspapers. This is what he does for a living. He's supposed to be like a William Randolph Hearst kind of character. And the newspaper crew, they're down in the press room, and Kane is losing the election, and they're trying to decide which headline to run. And they lift up both of them. And the first one says, Kane triumphant or something like that. And the other one says fraud at polls.
With a million majority already against him, and the church count is still to be heard from, I'm afraid we've got no choice.
This one?
That one.
It's like, it's Donald Trump right down the line. And then the narcissism.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize this until I saw it the other day on a big screen TV, that you can get now, these giant TVs. And there's a close-up of Kane at one point, and he's dressed up in really fancy clothes, and he's wearing a stick pin in his cravat or whatever, and it has a big K for Kane, right? And it's like Trump. Right. Everything has his name.
That's funny. Have you ever done an essay on your Citizen Kane theory of Donald Trump? That's great. I love that.
It's fun to rainy day history.
Oh yeah, that's cute.
What the funniest thing about it is that Trump misunderstood. He thinks Kane is the good guy.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? He's like that. No, that's the model for my career. Like I feel like it did not end in happiness.
No.
So you recently wrote this op-ed for the New York Times after the election, where
every 4 years I come out and write the same story about.
You did point this out, and you are continuing to point this out. So let's get to, okay, you've been, as you say, you've been writing about these things for 20 years, and you say, I've begun to doubt that any combination of financial disaster or electoral chastisement will ever turn on the light bulb. For liberals, I fear that 90s style centrism will march on. And, we are seeing, in this election, we saw a worsening of the tendencies that you describe, where it's even more rich people voting for Democrats and even more working class people going into the Trump coalition. Yeah. But of course, ultimately, Trump is a fraudster, right? You write about the history of populism. Left and right populism are not the same thing.
No, don't get me going now.
Well, you're here to get going.
Well, look, you asked three different things there. So, first of all, the idea that centrism is that it quote unquote centrism. It's not really centrism at all, but the sort of Clintonism that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. This philosophy that the Democrats developed through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that absolutely and utterly controls the party now. And I said in the article, I think the Times cut this line out because they have obviously they have house style and you're not allowed to say certain things. But I said, this philosophy will go on because it makes too much pundit sense. Mm. It is too obviously true to the people who sort of are the the professional elite of our world, the people who control our world. It's too obviously true, even though it's false, right? Even though it's completely wrong, it's too flattering to the kind of people who write columns in the New York Times, to the kind of people that that are on MSNBC, the kind of people who run American universities. It's who run foundations, who run Wall Street firms. It makes too much sense. They're like, yes, the learning class should be in charge. Yes, the intellectuals, the elites, or the people who have advanced degrees should be in charge. That's why they call it an advanced degree. That's why they call it Yale, right? I don't fucking know. I'm just making stuff up here. But that's it makes too much sense to them for it to ever be, derailed by electoral chastisement. That's and I believe that. I don't know how you get them out of there. You asked about populism.
Well, yes, and then
want me to go down
and this. Well, but I do think it's important that what we're not going to see, right, is so we are seeing this class realignment, where, as you point out, the neighborhood that you grew up in went from Republican to Democrat, and people who used to be Democrats who are working class are now Republicans. Even Latinos in South Texas, right, are starting to vote for Donald Trump in larger numbers. But what we're not going to see, it's not like we're going to see the Republicans embracing New Deal style, authentic.
They talk about it, don't they?
Populism.
They make those noises,
right? But then Trump gets into office and everyone's like anti-labor
taxes and puts the the oil man in charge of the EPA or whatever the hell it is. Yeah, absolutely. But this is this is a distinction that Nathan, we talked about how much fun it is to write and everything, and you sort of teased me because it's very frustrating that nobody listens. And this is one where I'm just like, I am just banging my head against the wall. I'm from Kansas. Populism means something there. It was a movement that we had in Kansas. It's like a well-known thing, what it was. Even if people don't know the details, they know that it existed. They know that it was what it was roughly. It was a farmer labor. It was a left-wing farmer labor movement a long time ago that swept over the state and then disappeared. Everybody knows those basic facts. And when I was in graduate school, I decided it would be my subject. I would study it. And I did. I studied it for several years, and then I gave up on it because everybody was writing about populism back then. This is in the 80s. Everybody was writing about populism. It just felt pointless to add another monograph, on top of this already gigantic pile of essays and books about American populism. And then when I went to write, but it's always been the motif of my political writing, because it's populism is, in addition to it being important because I come from Kansas, populism is also important because it's the beginning of the modern left in American life. This is literally where it starts, is with the Populist Party, which is they're the first ones to actually start calling for all of these, calling for a regulated economy, calling for nationalization of things, votes for women, among other things, to basically to formulate economic policy in the interests of ordinary people rather than in the interests of the banks. And this was, not banks, big business. And that was unthinkable at the time. That was revolutionary. It was absolutely new, and it was shocking, and they were more or less beaten down. Okay. But it was also the beginning. And it later, it flowered into what we know as the New Deal, the Roosevelt administration, and up into, and this became what the Democratic Party was about up until Lyndon Johnson. Johnson's grandfather, by the way, was an actual uppercase P populist in the Texas legislature. It's neither here nor there, but this is the backdrop of everything that I know about American politics. And in What's the Matter with Kansas, I was describing the people who were once the rank and file of populism being drawn over to the other side, and that it was being done with language that sounded populist. Okay? So this is an important distinction, but I can't. It doesn't. It feels like I've lost. Like I've lost it here, but it's fake populism. So the other side. So the Republicans use populist language all the time. That you go back to Reagan, they did it. George W. Bush, this is one of the reasons he annoyed me so much, did it all the time. But they always did it in a cultural sense. Like you might remember George W. Bush with his pork rinds and touring the country with, country singers and, this crap, right? And Reagan was very good at doing this act as well, but it's always an act. And then and at some point I lost control of this and people just started calling the right wing populist. And they started using the word populist as a synonym for racist. And then they started using the word populist as a synonym for fascist.
Right.
And I fight this as hard as I can. I just got an email the other day. I have a lot of readers in Europe. Weirdly enough, this is, like I said, I write for a French newspaper and I do book tours over there all the time. And but my latest book about populism, about the actual history of populism and how the word got, came to mean these things that are the exact opposite of what it was, which I think is important, by the way, in a really awful way. So I wrote a whole book about this, and they just it just drives them crazy. It's like they can't get their heads around it that a populist is not. So, example, I was reading an article in The Guardian the other day. I used to write for The Guardian, good paper. And I was reading an article. I'm sorry, and you have a bad history with them, but we won't go into
Guardian publishes things that I enjoy.
Yeah. So I'm reading an article about Trump's victory, and it's a very good article. And then at the very end of it, he says, this is what it looks like when he parks his populist tanks on your lawn. And I'm like, what? Yeah. Why do that? Why wreck an otherwise good article? And why trash a good word? Why trash a word that's at the heart and soul of the American left? Why do that? It just bugs the hell out of me. And there's consequences for it. There's consequences for it. And the consequences are what we see around us. When you say that what populism actually is fascism and racism, you have made this whole species of politics off limits to yourself. And it's a species of politics that, frankly, that we have to have if we're ever going to get out of this.
And you've almost validated Trump's own claim to what he is, right? He says he's a man of the people, and you say Trump is running as a man of the people, and you're like, no, you don't understand.
No, these are interlocking pathologies. So Richard Hofstadter, famous American historian, who I, let the record show, when I was younger, I really admired. He's a great writer and he's a brilliant thinker. Okay, but he was wrong. And this has been my entire. By the way, this is not just me. This is a lot of other American historians have gone down this road. For example, Christopher Lasch, who was his protege, and loved him, right? And then later started writing about populism himself. And what everybody comes to realize is that Hofstadter was wrong about populism, that his interpretation of it was a caricature and it was a stereotype, and it was, he had his examples, but they were cherry picked. This is something that we have a lot of experience with. His examples were cherry picked, and it was his depiction of populism was completely incorrect. And historians basically figured this out right away after his book came out, but they've never been able to stop. Again, it's an idea that can't be stopped by its own errors. This is now the second time we've talked about this. The reason his anti-populism is so flattering, the reason it works, is because it's so flattering. His idea of how do you get reform? So he's writing in the 1950s. How do you get reform? And he's coming out of this background. The New Deal is basically over. We're in the Eisenhower era. The great universities are coming up. They're expanding by leaps and bounds. And you have this whole new class of highly educated people being put in charge of everything. Daniel Bell also writes about this. All of these guys, intellectuals in the 50s, wrote about this. So how do you make reform? Well, according to Bell and Hofstadter and the rest of the sort of consensus gang, the way you make reform is you get a bunch of these guys around a table in Washington, D.C., and you decide on the reform. And that's the professional sort of model of reform. And that's where the Democratic Party is today. That's what they believe in. But what Hofstadter wanted us what he wanted to make toxic and make off limits, and so that we would never try to do it again, was the opposite model, the populist model, where reform comes from the bottom up.
Mm.
And that's what populism was. It was a mass movement of ordinary people where the idea was we have to educate everyone so that they understand the issues, because it's a democracy and we all have to participate. And that was the populist model. And
Yeah.
this is initiative and referendum comes out of that and all these other things. And once you tell yourself that that's actually racism, or that's actually, when you put that off limits to yourself, you've made a colossal mistake. You made a colossal choice. Let's put it that way. You've made a choice. It's a bad choice, but that's the choice that we have made. And all of these debates about populism are not idle, and they're not just about history. They're not just about something 100 years ago. They're about how to go forward. And that's why it's you shouldn't have asked me that, Nathan.
That's why I want to get to let's close with the how to move forward thing, because you have a passage in your New York Times op-ed where you say, "Can anything reverse it?" And you say, "Only a resolute determination by the Democratic Party to rededicate itself to the majoritarian vision of old, a great society of broad, inclusive prosperity that means universal healthcare, higher minimum wage, robust financial regulation, antitrust enforcement, unions, welfare state, higher taxes on billionaires, even the cool ones," which I like. And it means, above all, liberalism as a social movement, as a coming together of ordinary people, not, as you've just said, a series of top-down reforms by well-meaning professionals.
Yeah, well, there you got it. I mean, that's it. The thing is how to get there. And I don't spell that out because I don't know the way. And
it's tough, yeah. Within the party, outside the party,
Look, I mean, I want to try to be hopeful. Just so you know, the first draft of this essay that I wrote basically said that it's impossible. And I was in kind of a funk. It's impossible and we'll never get there and see you later. And then I took a step back and I was like, you can't say that. You can't go into the pages of the New York Times and say something like that. So I had to put some kind of sort of sunshiny ending on it. The thing is how to get there, and I don't know. I do know that it's been done before. Okay, so we do know that, let's look at these people in Listen Liberal, the New Democrats, the quote unquote New Democrats, the neoliberals before them. They did it. They conquered the party. The party is a site of contestation. As we were saying earlier, this is one of the reasons they always stave off the contest, right? They always manage to suppress the contest or to rig it in some way, like look at what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2020 or in 2016. Or they're like an open convention. No thanks.
Yeah.
But parties are contested. And and it has been done in our lifetimes. There has been a group that took over the Democratic Party and remade it in their own image. Now they've clung very tightly to the levers of power ever since, and nobody has a plan for how to get them out of there. But that doesn't mean you couldn't dream one up. You could do it. The other way is economic catastrophe. In the new
could happen.
The New Deal. I mean, nobody knew what Franklin Roosevelt was going to do. They just knew that he was the man of the moment, and he was able to completely remake the world as he saw fit. Now, the problem with this theory is we had that chance. That was 2008. That actually happened, and we did that, and we elected a man who we like. If you're anything like I was drinking the Hope Kool-Aid back then, Yeah. I went for Obama in a big way. I thought he was the man for the moment. I thought he was our generation's Franklin Roosevelt. I was completely wrong. And instead, he proceeded to enshrine this sort of neoliberal agenda in a way that we will probably never be able to. Well, I'm sorry, I should never go down that.
You had I think you have a funny part about Obama in the new piece, don't you? Didn't you say his?
Because there's that quote from him. I was flipping through Listen Liberal while I was writing this, and I was reminded of a quote from him when he was leaving office, and it's just so incredibly clueless, given what happened right after. What happened like 2 months later. It was in 2016, and he was talking to Business Week, You want to read it? I don't know.
Yeah. He said, just to bring things full circle about innovation, the conversations I have.
There's that word. That's what
innovation. The conversations I have with Silicon Valley and with venture capital pull together my interest in science and organizations in a way I really find satisfying. And you comment, I hope Mr. Obama finds his Silicon satisfaction. I hope the men of capital whose banks he bailed out during the financial crisis show a little gratitude and build him the biggest, most expensive, most innovative presidential library of them all. But his party is in ruins today without a leader and without a purpose. Whoa.
Yeah.
Harsh on Obama there.
I go back to that quote because it's so he's so blind to what's right around the corner in 2016, and what's happened ever since then.
It's like when you watch him at the correspondence dinner making fun of Trump, where he's like, silly Donald Trump.
Yeah, I know. So I look at that. I always thought that was fair game because Trump was kind of a jerk, right? He was spreading all the. It's also pretty goddamn harsh to have the president of the United States come out.
I think he should have told the Trump jokes
for a half an hour.
But I think it looks different because they didn't understand that Trump was a threat, right? I think is up until he won the 2016 election. I think it's illustrative. I don't think he shouldn't have made fun of Donald Trump, but you watch those moments and you realize like you think this guy's a clown and you don't understand like he is coming for you. He is going to destroy your. By the
way, and to go back to Citizen Kane, Trump is an opportunist. This is what these guys did. He's a businessman. He's an opportunist. He will say or do anything. And what did he choose to say? Think about this for a second. Trump is not. He may be stupid, but he's no dummy.
Yeah,
okay?
That's a good distinction.
I was at his 2016 convention, and he was rattling off all kinds of old-timey Democratic. Oh, one of the quotes that we didn't use in the Times article is his TV commercial from 2016, where he basically steals a passage from Bernie. It sounds like a Bernie Sanders commercial, and then JD Vance is now the one who's doing this now. But look, as long as the Democrats aren't going to stand up for these people, and the Democrats are saying, "Well, we got to leave the New Deal behind us." What is a guy who's an opportunist, who will say, a charlatan who will say or do anything? What's he going to do? About that. What's he going to do? He's going to take that rhetoric that you've discarded, and he's going to, this rhetoric that was incredibly powerful in its day, and he's going to use it against. He would be foolish to do it any other way.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to do no taxes on tips, for instance, but I thought it was a masterstroke to say to his voters, every time you get a receipt at a restaurant, write no taxes on tips, Trump 2024 on the receipt at the restaurant. That's what he told them. I thought that was brilliant.
That was a play. That was a play for Nevada, is what it was. In Nevada, the culinary union is.
But it's interesting that you mentioned the 2016 because I went back and read his RNC speech, and he said
he called for bringing back Glass-Steagall.
Everyone should read it because he says I've got it here. Big business, elite media, major donors are lining up behind the campaign of my opponent because they know she will keep our rigged system in place. Yep. I have visited the laid off factory workers, the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals. Every day I wake up determined to deliver for the people I've met across this nation that have been neglected, ignored, and abandoned. They're the forgotten men and women of this country, people who work hard.
That's straight out of Roosevelt.
No longer have a voice. I am your voice.
Yes, I thought that was incredibly powerful when he said that.
Yeah.
And by the way, I also went to his, I'm always going to these things in person. I went to his inauguration. And I thought his speech was actually not bad. The thing about American carnage and the empty mills standing like tombstones. Have you ever been to Fall River, Massachusetts?
I don't think I've been to Fall River.
It's one of these deindustrialized sacrifice zones. He is describing exactly what Fall River looks like. And I heard that and I knew instantly what he was talking about. But the sort of liberal pundits, they mocked that speech. They're like, what a terrible, remember they called it, I think they quoted George W. Bush and said, that was some weird shit.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, what, don't you guys get it? I mean, this has happened. Deindustrialization is real. It has swept over this country. And your guys, Clinton and Obama, well, not Obama so much, but certainly Clinton, are responsible for it. And then you go fast forward to J.D. Vance at the Republican convention, where he's, again, very, carefully and specifically pins it on the Democratic Party. Also tries to pin the Iraq War on them.
Well, I know we haven't even gotten to the foreign policy side of it, where they very successfully postured as anti-war in the exact same way, right? Where it's all phony, but it's very successful. I mean, you had Arab Americans voting for Trump.
It's like when you're out there, again, when you're like you discard these weapons, like, and one of the weapons you discard is the anti-war stance, right?
Yeah.
Hey, and then you're like, well, we're not going to, we're done with that because that's too left wing, or that's, whatever. And here's this guy who will literally say anything, and he sees that you've discarded it. What's he gonna do? Yes, that's right. He's gonna pick it up and use it.
He's gonna pick it up. He's gonna say, "You're campaigning with Dick Cheney. That how many thousands of Americans did Dick Cheney kill?
Oh my God!
These awful neocons who drove you into these disastrous wars."
When Vance said that at the Republican convention and tried to blame the Iraq War on Democrats, I was just sitting up in the bleachers, right? I was up in the nosebleed section, and I was like, "Ha ha ha!" And then they went and embraced Dick Cheney. Oh my God! They made it true.
I mean. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I do recommend that everyone now go and read your op-ed in the New York Times, and then everything else you've written for the last 20 years. They'll find some themes that you repeat fairly frequently. It's not your fault that you have to repeat yourself.
I've been writing it since 2004.
I'm sure you don't want to repeat yourself.
20 years of the same essay.
Yeah.
With, slightly different,
with variations. But hopefully, I don't know if the liberals will listen now, but we don't need the liberals to listen now as long as the people who will.
What's funny is it caused a big stir, or I actually have no way of knowing what happened at the New York Times, but I get emails from readers, and I've, getting more for this than for anything I've written probably since 2016. Because so I wrote the last time I wrote this essay, I wrote it for The Guardian in 2016. It's, by the way, one of my best essays ever, although I think this one might be better, but it caused a major stir all over the world, but not here. It had like zero reaction here in America, but like I went to Australia on the strength of that essay. I was on Canadian radio. I mean, on and on and on. But it had no impact here. But this time it was in the New York Times, did have an impact. By the way, it's the letters are alternately very pleased and very angry.
Yeah,
I get people who think they just read the title. Have you ever had this problem? People just read the headline and they don't read the essay, and so they think I'm a Trump supporter.
The crazy thing is that the title is the one thing the writer doesn't write.
Yeah, I know, but that's the one thing they read. Yeah,
it's like,
yeah. It's a real experience. I haven't had anything in the like with this kind of impact for a long time. So
well, good. We'll see if it lasts. Thomas Frank, thank you so much for joining us again on Current Affairs today.
Nathan, my pleasure. Anytime.